Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we are discussing women writers because we're going to look at Sharp by Michelle Dean, which is a book being published in spring 2018, which looks at the lives and works of some of America's most influential 20th century women writers. And it is a fantastic collection of writers. Let me just stick my glasses on so I can give you a heads up of who's in here. So we have everything from women like Dorothy Parker and Hannah Arendt, Mary McCarthy, Susan Sontag, Nora Ephron, Joan Didion. And I particularly like how Michelle also brings in other writers that we might not be so familiar with, such as Zora Neale Hurston, who is largely known as a fiction writer now, but she was a black writer in the 1960s and covered a famous lynching trial, but she was largely rehabilitated by Alice Walker in the 1990s as a black feminist writer. So I'm glad that she was included in this. So why these women? What connects these women? So what Michelle has started with is the word sharp. So each of these great women writers in this book were described as sharp at some point in their life. Now that could have been a comment on their writing, or it could have been a comment on their politics, or of course, as most women know, when it comes from the lips of men, it also can be a criticism. So what Michelle is looking at when she takes the word sharp is all of these women have been described as sharp, but what she looks at in each of the chapters, which follows each one of the women, is she looks at what it is that made these women sharp. So it isn't necessarily what I really liked about this is it doesn't deify these women. Michelle really exposes them for their flaws, their politics, perhaps class issues. There's certainly, she doesn't shy away from showing how the writers often avoided being described as feminists. Even worse, were actually openly critical about what feminist movements there are at this time. But what Michelle is looking at is what it took to be a successful women writer in an era when none of them were given any benefit or had any support from the very patriarchal institutions that they worked for and the magazines and outlets that they wrote for. And I particularly like that because it really exposes not only the world and the context that the women had to work in, but what I liked is Michelle really shows that it's so easy for us to overlook that these women wrote hugely critical, important pieces which have stayed the test of time and have become seminal works on anything from tyranny and fascism to coverage of Nazi trials, coverage of lynching trials. So these women have really left their mark, and a lot of them are overlooked. A lot of them we don't know much about. So I just flew through this book that really brought these women back out from the shadows and really looked at their work. And I really enjoyed that. Michelle weaves them in, so the chapters aren't necessarily standalone. It's sort of how these women connected to each other, because some of them were friends, some of them were enemies and often clashed with each other. And I particularly like how Michelle weaves from one woman to the other through their connections, and not necessarily positive connections, because obviously we have this concept of sisterhood now and support, and how Michelle looks at how this wasn't always the case for the women writing in the post-war era and indeed in the pre-war era in 20th century America. I flew through this and I learned so much from names that it's very easy for us now to sort of say, oh, I should know more about Hannah Arendt or Dorothy Parker, Susan Sontag, Nora Ephron, she's a screenwriter. And you sort of think these women were so much more than just sort of vague memories and links to Hollywood. They were really critical writings in the cultural discourse of the time. And Michelle really platforms them, and I love how she platforms them, flaws and all, because it's really important for us to see women in the context they had to work in, and also what kind of personalities they were. Some of them were fiery, some of them were introverts, some of them were spiky and sharp, some of them were quite homely and maternal. Which you wouldn't necessarily associate with the sort of very need to be an explicitly power feminist style woman to succeed in 20th century America. I flew through Sharp by Michelle Dean. I absolutely adored it. 10, 11, 12, a dozen great writers discussed, their works discussed, that great excerpts from their polemics, and I really enjoyed it. And these were women who, as Michelle says, definitely made an art of having opinion. They were opinion formers and opinion creators, and I'm incredibly glad I got to read more about them. Sharp by Michelle Dean.